think as often happens during these meditations, you're always reluctant to bring it to a finish. And I do trust that everybody was able to get some idea of just what it's like to have your mind still. Mind not moving, with just the still consciousness there, with all of the other activity that's going on in the body. And just the wonderful, you start to get a feel for the wonderful, the beauty of just the way that this subtle pleasure of meditation works for us, the way that it does allow us to settle so closely into the present moment. And then just noticing that present moment itself, just how that present moment is just so important to realise, because it is a place of reality. This present moment is real. It's really the only thing that is real in the way that we live our lives. Because you start to see, I think, after a while, that really our life, as we live it usually from the past through into the future, there's a kind of a fuzziness of the focus of our lives that really builds this, gives the opportunity for this world to build the way that it does. And it's only really when you do start to settle into the stillness of the moment, into this present moment, that you can really start to see the way that this is, or the place where the reality is. It's here, because as you're starting to sort of bring your mind in closer and closer into this focus of tranquility and of concentration, and there is a kind of any time that the mind sort of moves into that tranquil state, there is always this beauty and joy of the relaxation that comes with that is just there. But it is quite subtle, it's not exactly, it's not something that you might yell and scream about. Actually, it's sort of the opposite of that. But the subtlety and joy of that stillness is really, I think, is just something to behold. And I think as you get closer to it, you start to become more compelled and want to be there and be with it, and just in the way that the Buddha did in his life. He certainly recommended meditation for us all in the way that we do this, so that we can start to really try to work out to see just the beauty of where this all is, where this truth is. So sort of just using that now to sort of come back on to tonight's topic, which is really all about just, what is enlightenment in terms of the way this works for us in the world that we live in. And you can notice that as we're looking at this, we can start to see that moving into this middle way, this point of balance that's right there between the past and the future, is really a very important place to be with and understand. Because as we can be with and understand this, we're starting to really be with what the Buddha was pointing to, starting to point right to where the door of enlightenment is, if you like. So the mind becomes very still, and I don't know how that works for you, but when I kind of look at that, you can sort of see this stillness is like it's an iteration. It's something that's beginning and ending. The Buddha actually talked about that consciousness, pure consciousness itself, begins and ends countless times in the wink of an eye. And you can kind of intuit that, even though, like it's very difficult to sort of see, one individual moment of consciousness because it's just all moving so fast. But you can sort of see the way that it resounds in your mind, the way you can sort of feel and sense that stillness that's there as you kind of start to observe some of the other conditions that are going on around that stillness that's happening very fast, countless times in the wink of an eye. So you get to the point where you can notice that yes, that's the stillness, but then the breath is like breath comes in and then the breath goes out. It's like a cycle or a condition. And then you can sort of think of maybe things like perhaps a day. A day, takes this long. It begins like this morning. It began this morning and then it'll end. And then a week begins and it ends maybe over here. And then a year begins over here and then it maybe ends right over here. And you can go through the scale of all of these conditions that we kind of recognise that we create really in our lives, weeks and years and lives and everything like that, even to the extent then you can start to get an idea of really just even a life. A life begins. I mean, we don't really remember probably too much about our birth, but we know that we were born. But you can see that you're born and then you die. Your life finishes, and this is a much larger scale. And then you can sort of move even, or intuit at least, the scales even through further than that. Where you get into universal cycles and. The Buddha was, I've often mentioned here, the Buddha was very good at that too. He was able to, when the monks asked him, where did consciousness begin? He said that he said that he'd looked back over 24 universal cycles. He called them kalpas in the Pali language. And no beginning could be seen. But he had this wonderful kind of knowledge of very, very small scales, you might say the quantum scales that we kind of think about today, but he also knew the astronomical scales of universal cycles. He could see all of that, and he could see, and when he was talking about all this too, he talked about it as seeing it all in this fathom-long length of body. So that again gives us a clue to just where we should be looking, because he actually said that. The Buddha said, this is everything that I've seen inside this fathom-long length of body. So the Buddha he's not really looking out into the universe to try and measure the universe that's out there. He's kind of looking inside for his answers. And we kind of know the wisdom of doing that really is you start to do this meditation because you start to see that really, and as I started to I think point out in the beginning of the meditation too, just the way that when we do sit, when we're taking a breath, it takes really the whole of this earth, takes really the whole of this universe to be there with this breath that we're taking. The whole universe is right there. From the beginning to the end. It's right there, or the beginning till now at least anyway. It's right there with us in this breath, right here on the seat with you. The entire universe. And then as you start to kind of notice and see just the wisdom of what that means, you start to see why the Buddha talked about the mind in the way that he did. And we can start to understand that the mind just isn't our brain. It's not just the brain. The mind's a much bigger, has a much bigger capacity than that, because the mind is in fact really a function of of really all that there is. It's a function of where the stillness runs to, the still consciousness. Where does it run to? And it runs right through to the edges of the universe. Maybe even further if we want to start to create and develop things in that way. But you start to notice that this world really is inside us, and our mind is something bigger than just our brain, just what we're thinking about here, and that we can, as we're sitting this meditation, we can start to understand and see this in a way of, as a way of knowing. It's very different than something that we might believe in. Your brain is very good at sort of helping us believe things, and we can create any belief system. And the world is such a thing, it seems to me anyway, that when you do, if you want to believe in something and you've got enough passion to try and make that belief real, you can probably do it. It's just like, even now I think, with all this trouble we've got with climate change and things here, I think, as I know a lot of you would too, sort of think, why don't we try and just fix up the earth and try and make it better? But we kind of, in a way, though, start running into the outside and thinking, no, we'll go to Mars. Let's go to Mars. And that we're already starting to create that right now. Probably won't be long before we've got the space rockets and the wherewithal to do all of that. So this mind can create all sorts of things. It's a wonderful creative vehicle. It has that ability to create. But yet, at the same time, it's also got this ability to look back right to the present moment. We can see over all of these scales, right from the breath that just begins and ends countless times in the wink of an eye, right through to universal scales that, goodness knows how many. We're 14,000 million years now into this universal cycle, so the physicists tell us. So it's a very creative, the mind is a very creative kind of instrument that we have. And just in the way that we condition ourselves, the way that we want to believe in things, the way that things want to go, well, we can do that too. But the trouble is that when we do that, we're always caught up with this very first noble truth, just coming back to what the Buddha talked about, we're always caught up with this dukkha, the very first noble truth. And as you start to sort of work with this, I think you start to see that it's really, because, we have this idea, well, we can create all this, we'll create a perfect world. But you can see, even just with the events of this week, even though with the best will in the world for a lot of people probably trying to help countries be democratic and be happy, to be democracies. But it doesn't, there's always a fly in the ointment, isn't there? Because that's the nature of dukkha. It has that dual nature about it. You can have these lofty ideas, but the opposite of it is always there, because the lofty idea is not necessarily in balance in the same way that it is once we start to get into this present moment, when we start to get right into the reality. There really isn't any, well, there's probably some reality, you can say, but it's a very, you might say it's a coarse reality as you move further out into the extremes. And but then, of course, as you're starting to come back to the present moment, you're coming back to a very subtle and very balanced place. And this is what the Buddha was interested in. He wasn't interested in everything that's out there. He wasn't interested in Mars, or in fact, he knew all of these things too. I mean, the suttas are full of stories that what the Buddha told us that he saw inside his fathom-long length of body, to tell us, in the Seven Suns Sutra, telling us about how the earth will eventually finish. And as it turns out, he tells the story exactly the way as we now know that physicists tell us it will end, when the sun becomes a red giant in maybe 4 billion years or something, and will eventually expand to the radius of or the diameter of Mars. And all these stories, he saw them all. He saw them all in his mind anyway. Just the way that this clarity that comes about with this present moment is so real. The reality of it is really right there for us to see. And in terms of the question I've posed tonight, is and I'm thinking of that really more in terms too of because in this realm of dualities, you get the theistic view, that there's a God out there and there's God somewhere pulling all of these levers and making the world the way that it is, right through to the other extreme of the atheistic idea that there isn't anything at all. It's all it's nihilistic, just nothing at all. But that's not right either, is it? This one's not right. That one's not quite right. You can create lives and have try to create a life and a reality around those things, but there's not a truth there, not the truth in the same way that the Buddha was pointing to. He was always coming back to what he talked about as the middle way, wasn't he? And Buddhism is really, that's the whole idea of this religion, is Buddhism is the path of the middle way. And that's, even just when you think back in the history of how the Buddha got to be who he was, he started off his life in the palace, as we all know, probably lived a very hedonistic life, had everything he wanted in the world, had a beautiful wife, had a beautiful son, probably had a lot of good skills. He was well liked, well handsome. What else could you really want in your life? But he knew that it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough for him. And then when he went outside and saw the 4 heavenly messengers of the old man, the sick man, the man on the funeral pyre, the death, and then the monk, the 4 heavenly messengers, and he realised that he needed to explore further, to investigate more deeply into what this was all about. And then he went and learnt meditation, and then he became an ascetic. And there was probably no one at that time that could bash themselves or thrash themselves as good as the Buddha could. He had quite a reputation of this hair shirt mentality. It's said that he was that emaciated at one point in time, he could put his hand in his stomach and feel his backbone. And all of those statues that are there in the Golden Temple in Bangkok sort of testify to this. If you go and look at those, you can sort of see the image of the Buddha there in this emaciated state. So in his early life, he had these extremes, the extremes of plenty, of anything that he wanted, anything that he could dream about was there, right through to the other extreme of asceticism, harsh asceticism that he was practicing. And then he thought in his mind, this is not working. What will I do? I'll come back to the present moment and come back to the middle way. What about the middle way, he thought? So this is really where it is, and really where all of Buddhism kind of works towards, and exactly what we're trying to practice here, just with the middle way. And when he started to understand and work with that, and he could really start to work and understand the way still consciousness works, the way that consciousness itself works, and the way that consciousness itself builds and aggregates into, from just a moment of still consciousness countless times in the wink of an eye, and the way that it builds and aggregates. You can find all this in the sutras, the way that the 5 aggregates and the way all that works, sort of building up through our mind, just the 4 mental capacities from stillness of mind to the way that mind moves, and once it moves it goes to perception, and then it goes to feeling, and then gradually fuses into the physical. And you can deconstruct that in your meditation too, as we're able to get deeper and more absorbed into our meditation. Ajahn Brahma's a genius at teaching us the jhanas, just to understand and feel what it's like to be absorbed right deeply into your mind, to a place where the world is gone, where your body's gone. It's just your mind left, only your mind. It can really be relatively easily experienced in meditation. So you gradually start sort of getting the idea of just where this mind is. This mind is really all that it is, and then you can start to see just the very first verse of the Dhammapada, where he talks about mind is chief. Mind is the forerunner of all things, and we can start to see that it is our mind that is the mind and the consciousness of our mind that is creating all of this. But then as he sort of practiced more and more, he could see that this consciousness really was, and once you kind of get into the stillness again is something that you can really use mindfulness with. And again, it's maybe worthwhile just even sort of pointing here just to the 4 foundations of mindfulness, and that's really just what we did at the start of this meditation. First of all, we looked at the body, and the first foundation of mindfulness is just mindfulness of the body. And then the second foundation of mindfulness is the mindfulness of feelings. So that's exactly where we went to in the second in the meditation that we started earlier on. And then the third foundation of mindfulness is the mindfulness of mind itself. And then the fourth foundation of mindfulness is really the mindfulness of all of the phenomena that arises and finishes in our mind. That's the fourth foundation. So, and this is really just, I guess what I'm talking about here. And these 4 foundations of mindfulness really just, give you the idea of just what mindfulness is, just what we're doing when we're practicing mindfulness. And mindfulness is the 4 foundations. It has those 4 foundations. And it's just, I was just going to, just here with the 7 factors of enlightenment, with the first one being mindfulness, and then you move into the second one, which is, and this is just as we've been talking about here too, the second foundation is investigation. Second foundation of enlightenment this is now. So the first foundation of enlightenment is mindfulness. So once that mindfulness is established, then we can move into the investigation stage, and that's really what I'm encouraging you to do here, to investigate mindfully. And then as you, with the investigation, the next foundation for enlightenment is the energy that comes. So you start to build up a real energy for understanding and investigating these things. And then to feel what I hope I've been trying to impart to here is just the beauty and the joy and the rapture, just that wonderful bliss that comes when you kind of know just the subtlety of this beauty and truth that's there in the heart of the moment. And then the next thing just collapses into what you might say, which is a tranquility. Just that tranquility that just, you know, like, well, you know what it's like to, that tranquility, but that's the fifth foundation of enlightenment. And then after that comes the next foundation is concentration. So when that tranquility is there, then the mind's able to really concentrate deeply. And this is really when I'm talking about sort of looking into consciousness itself. We can start to concentrate into that foundation of mindfulness. And then, of course, the last one is equanimity. Just, and probably from a meditator's point of view, that equanimity is quite challenging in a way, because a lot of people, well, you know, and I'm sort of no different than this either. There's quite a fear in this equanimity in the way that this comes about, I think, because we're really here looking towards letting go of all that we know, all of this knowledge that we have of this world, just letting go into this equanimous state, this equanimity that is just bringing you to a total, complete balance, into a total, complete sanity. And just in saying that word sanity, it sort of brings us back to the topic of tonight. Just is enlightenment mental suicide? And you can see that it's really not like that at all. That as we're practicing towards this, we're heading right towards sanity, towards what it is to be totally sane, no longer sort of caught up in extremes that sort of blur across the present moment all the time, where we're kind of this way and that way and caught up in the dualities. We're moving right into the balances, into this balance point where the dualities finish, where dukkha finishes. Now, the Buddha, the way that the Buddha talked about this and the way that he explained all of that was really by calling this whole thing cessation. The Buddha, he talked about the ability to stop, just to stop. And there's a great story that I kind of remember quite well all the time about Angulimala. I'm sure that some of you will have heard of that. Angulimala was a murderer, really, but he must have been a fairly good murderer, because the Buddha could certainly see goodness in Angulimala. He wasn't anyone that was, he wasn't hopeless. And the Buddha knew that he could teach Angulimala. But the Angulimala was after the Buddha because he wanted to kill him. But the Buddha could sort of use his mental states to make sure that he always had Angulimala befuddled in a way, and Angulimala would yell out to the Buddha, Buddha, stop, stop. But the Buddha turned to Angulimala in a way of sort of teaching and said, Angulimala, I have stopped. It is you that needs to stop. So he had this way of saying this, he'd stopped. So when we think about that, so the Buddha stopped, he was already enlightened, he already had this cessation happened. It happened for him, the cessation of really all of the phenomena, I guess. I mean, but what had really stopped was his attachment to it, because he was obviously still living his life at that point, even though he was enlightened and arahat. But his life was still living itself out. It was still playing out, and he had all of these situations to deal with. And of course, it was right during that whole period there, the period up to when he died at 83, he was constructing the Dharma teaching the Dharma, setting all of this up. So when it does come to this question, is enlightenment mental suicide? You can see that it's not really the right way to look at it, is it? Because this place that he's at is really a place of balance. And it's up to us all to really understand really where that place is and what that place feels like, what it is, to know what that feels like. And it's a place too where consciousness has stopped, where consciousness is not anymore kind of pushing him around. He's not being pushed around by conscious thoughts anymore. He's kind of detached from them, he's finished with them. So, and I think that too, the other thing that I think about when I'm sort of contemplating this too is just the idea that we really need to see that this is something that we all must do for ourselves. It's not something that Ajahn Brahm can do for us or anyone else can sort of step in and help you kind of work all of this out. It's really, we need to do this for ourselves. So you start to see really that, and it's, quite often I try to just sort of think about this, but when I'm looking out here at you, I can sort of see that this is Dennis's mind. Dennis's mind includes all of you in the hall here, all of what's happening here. This is my mind, but when you look back at me, what you're seeing is in your mind. And you're responsible for your mind, and I'm responsible for my mind. The same with Ajahn Brahm too, he's responsible for his mind. I mean, very often a lot of us would like him to be more responsible for us, for the rest of us, to sort of take charge of us, or sort of maybe do more for us in a way. But you see, but Ajahn Brahm has got that kind of wonderful way of always just being able to sort of slip away from that responsibility, the responsibility of sort of taking charge of you. His way of teaching is really more to empower you to do this for yourself. And we need to do this for ourselves, because each one of us has an individual view of this universe, of this world. I mean, you need to sort of check all this out too. I don't want to just necessarily put this out as a kind of a dogma or that, but just look and see, just see whether or not this is true or not true. But we all see things very differently. We see the happenings in the world with different perceptions, we have different feelings about it. We all construct it in different ways, in our own personal way. So it is our own personal world that we need to work with, and our own personal world that we're always needing to make sure is in line with truth and the Dharma. So I did want to just finish tonight with I wanted to just read you again one of my favourite pieces from the Dhammapada, which I think kind of encapsulates all of this in such an easy and beautiful way. Words supposedly written by the Buddha in the Dhammapada. This is verse 21. And it just simply goes, heedfulness is the deathless, heedfulness is the deathless path. Heedlessness is the path to death. Those that are heedful do not die. Heedful, or the heedless rather, are like the dead. So there's the Buddha's words, his own words here. So I'll just sort of read that again, just so that it sort of does sink in a bit. So heedfulness is the deathless path. Heedlessness is the path to death. Those who are heedful do not die. Heedless are like the dead. So you can see even from that verse that it's not, there's really no question that we're trying to annihilate ourselves or just look at anything, say, in an atheistic way, just in a nihilistic way at all. This path of practice is really a way of embracing everything that's there. It's accepting everything that's there, accepting the whole universe just the way that it is, and then being able to just let it go and become peaceful with it. And we do that basically by practicing the meditation, sort of learning to be able to be able to sort of see what our consciousness is doing. Certainly in the terms of mindfulness, if we look at that fourth foundation of mindfulness, looking at all of the way that the things that, the phenomena of the world as it arises and finishes, just knowing that phenomena, just even the phenomena of a breath. But really it runs to everything at all. It's a very, very complicated and complex world that we're involved in, but really it is all just energy that's beginning and ending. And we can leave it go like that and stay on this wheel of samsara just to stay caught in this samsaric cycle of going round and round and round, or we can practice to become peaceful and to let go and to stop. But we're not stopping anywhere else but right here and now, right here in this moment in time. This is where we're stopping. And this is where reality is. This is where sanity is. It's not the insanity of maybe wanting to kill yourself or get rid of everything we don't like in the world. It's a pathway of accepting and being able to accept everything that's there in this world and being able to just to live with it, be with it, let it go, and just be with our consciousness until we can develop the mindfulness such that we can see that consciousness is finished. And that is something that's there for all of us, that we can all do this as all of us as human beings with the ability to self-reflect on ourselves. This opportunity is open to us. But it's not a straightforward thing, is it? I mean, when the Buddha said, he said, who am I going to teach this to? He was really quite bereft. How can I teach this? And then when all of the powers of goodness of the universe came down to him on the night of his enlightenment and said to him, just go and teach those with a little dust in their eyes. So we can know that, not everybody's going to be attracted necessarily to this beauty. The world is very compelling. That external world out there is a very compelling place. But it's filled with dukkha. And if we want to be free with dukkha, the Buddha has given us the pathway to travel to it. So I'll leave my comments there and just invite any questions. If anyone in the audience here would like some questions, or if there's any on the internet too, it would be very nice to try and answer those for you.
Hi, Dennis.
Drew. G'day, Drew. Thanks. My eyes, I'm very, very blind now. So I know Drew very well, but I can see his shape over there. Hello, Drew.
Very good talk. And I guess, for disclosure, I'll reveal myself as the person that posed that question to you.
Very good.
And I think that you've answered it in quite a good way by really pointing out that enlightenment is not... enlightenment is sanity, basically, and it's not suicide, or mental suicide. And I suppose just to fill out all the background of the talk, my view at the time we were discussing this was that by achieving that sanity, you basically extinguish the traits of your personality that continually bring you back into rebirth. And I mean, I assume this, I don't know it. By extinguishing that personality, that's permanently ending that, I guess, perception of self that you had, and that could be an analogy to mental suicide. But the way that you presented it, I think, is a better way of saying that really you're coming to your senses and perhaps discarding those traits that are binding you into samsara.
Right. Couldn't have said it better myself, Drew.
You did say it better. Thanks, Dennis.
Thank you. And for those interested too, Drew did a talk here on Wednesday night on right livelihood, and anyone that wants to look at that, you can look at that on the net as well. Any other questions? Or comments? Thanks, Nick. So I'm just looking at this. I'm just making sure that I'm reading it right here. I've got the question is: I think people would jump out of planes and take LSD. I think people who jump out of planes and take LSD, they're getting a taste of enlightenment, and actually. And their actual stages to enlightenment is the question. So Ronan from Ireland posed that very challenge. I'm not quite sure that I guess you really have to try that if you want it. I know that. It probably does run against, and what I would kind of see too as really a problematic thing if we're talking about LSD and mind-altering drugs and so on to do things. There may well be a perception that these kinds of things might allow you to sort of see deeper into yourselves. But when you are relying on some kind of stimulant like that or a drug like that, I think it's a bit of a slippery slope because you're not really ever quite sure that your mind is really straight, really pure. Well, this does fight against the fifth precept anyway. The fifth precept of the Buddha made was not to take any drugs or alcohol that intoxicate the mind. And I mean, from my point of view too, I mean, I used to be, when I was a young man, I used to like a good drink. I liked beer and the ability to sort of go to parties and be happy and use the alcohol to give me the chance of being socially acceptable and all of that, all that goes with that. But I will say that once I started to get into this practice of meditation, I just heeding the Buddha's rule, I did then start to let all of that go a bit, and gradually, bit by bit, it was over maybe a year or 2 years that I kind of stopped drinking alcohol. But it was interesting because at that point I was really trying to get deeper and deeper into this meditation, deeper and deeper into the stillness. But I noticed that that as I kind of let the alcohol go, it might have even been just my own mental state that was sort of causing this, but as I gradually let that go, the meditation did get better. And then I sort of lingered around for a while, just only drinking one drink. If I went to a party or that, just one drink. But I would notice that even that, and again, this might have been my mental state that was doing this, I'm not sure, but just that one drink was not helping me at all. My mind would still just end up blurry and doubtful and confused. I just couldn't quite get past that, and it was only really after I gave up alcohol completely that I was able to really start to understand and see the clarity that can come into your mind. But previous to that, that clarity was always a little bit blurry. So whilst I appreciate, Ronan, your comment here about LSD, and I know, and I've heard from several other people, that LSD can be quite an experience, and even some of this ayahuasca and stuff like this that's being taken down in South America. I understand that some of those drugs do give people insights in various ways. But this insight that we've been talking about tonight, this insight into the reality of the present moment, it's very, very fine, very, very... You need really all of your faculties really to be there. It's not that you need to be smart or clever or anything. It's nothing like that at all. I mean, when you look at, say, Ajahn Chah, Ajahn Brahm's teacher, Ajahn Chah really was... he had to leave school, or he left school because he really couldn't add up. He couldn't do the school work. So they decided to put him into the monastery. And when he went into the monastery, of course, he was a world beater. He kind of, because he understood the Dharma straight away, may have been that his mind was simple to understand these things. I'm not really sure, but Ajahn Brahm tells me, and Ajahn Jagaro too, that he was a very, very smart man, actually, Ajahn Chah, but very perceptive, very kind of knowledgeable and knowing, and mercurial too, in the way that he kind of worked and taught with people. So he had this, he wasn't necessarily intellectual, but he just knew. He just knew what this life is. So when I'm sort of talking about this fine quality that you need in your mind, the way that the mind needs to be so pure and so still, I would find it difficult